And welcome to Irvine and to the Arnold and Mabel Beckman Center of the National Academies of Engineering, Science, and Medicine, and to the 26th Annual Athlete Richardson Clarke Prize Award Ceremony sponsored by the National Water Research Institute. As our members know us, NWRI, and we are really proud to be here this evening. I'm Kevin Hardy. I'm the Executive Director of NWRI, and I'm screwing up the presentation right now, which is not a good thing, but that's what I'm good at. To quote from a talk given by NWRI's co-founder in this very room about 20 years ago, almost to the day, Joan Irvine Smith said that NWRI has been defined as an institute without walls because of its ability to support a wide array of water research projects without itself having a research staff or facilities. And although NWRI is based here in Orange County, I'm proud to say that because we collaborate with stakeholders around the globe, the sun really never sets on our work today. So on behalf of James Ferriman, the chair of the NWRI Board of Directors, and Orange County Sanitation District Director who is ill this evening and unable to attend, it's an honor and a privilege to welcome you all this evening to celebrate the 2019 Clarke Prize laureate, Dr. Paul Westerhoff of Arizona State University. The Clarke Prize was established in 1993 in honor of Athlete R. Clarke, mother of NWRI co-founder Joan Irvine Smith, to award outstanding research scientists who, through their devotion and perseverance, have implemented better water science and technology. The prize, which consists of a medallion and a $50,000 cash award, is presented annually and is designated by the International Congress of Distinguished Awards as one of the most prestigious water awards in the world. Our formal program is going to begin after dinner, and the program is going to really highlight, and no question, the lecture that's going to be entitled Foreseeing Unintentional Water Challenges That Affect Human and Ecosystem Health. We're going to explore some of the unintended consequences of our work, and I can't wait to hear the insight provided by Dr. Westerhoff. So I'll leave you now to enjoy both compelling table conversation and a meal that's been specially curated for us from the staff here at Beckman Center, who I want to thank now. And thank you for supporting NWRI and helping us advance water resources science and policy through collaboration and innovation. Enjoy dinner. We'll be back with the program in about 30 minutes. Well, good evening once again. And again, I hate to break up the conversation because everyone who knows me knows that I enjoy a good conversation. But once again, as I mentioned earlier, and before I start going, I hate to be that guy, so I already did this. I already turned my phone off. And so if you want to take just a second to turn your phone's ringer down so you're not that person, you feel like the phone's ringing, you got to answer it, ethical dilemmas, and trying to listen to a lecture. You don't want that. But as I mentioned earlier, the Clarke Prize was established in 1993 in honor of Athlete R. Clarke. She's the mother of NWRI's co-founder, Joan Irvine Smith, and the purpose was to award outstanding research scientists who, through their devotion and perseverance, had implemented better water science research and technology. Mrs. Smith's co-founders, however, were a group of Southern California water agencies. And these agencies shared Ms. Smith's belief that meeting the ever-growing demand for water, protecting water quality, and replenishing diminishing water supplies were both formidable and expensive challenges. So those agencies partnered up with the foundation and created NWRI. And today, our member agencies, which collectively serve more than 7.5 million people, continue to provide leadership to the water industry worldwide, as well as to our humble institute. The NWRI member agencies are the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, the Irvine Ranch Water District, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the Orange County Sanitation District, the Orange County Water District, and the West Basin Municipal Water District. We've got a banner over here with those leading utilities on it. And they provide leadership to NWRI through an active and engaged board of directors, many of whom are here this evening, joined by colleagues from their respective member agencies. So It's a pleasure for me to take just a few moments to introduce these members of the NWRI Board of Directors and their colleagues and executives who are here with us tonight. So from the Orange County Water District, we have NWRI Director Jordan Brandman. Jordan. OCWD Director Kelly Rowe. OCD Director Tree Ta and his wife Ann. We have NWRI Treasurer Jason Daticus. From the Orange County Sanitation District, we have Jim Herberg. And from the Irvine Ranch Water District, we have two of the NWRI directors, IRWD directors. And what's important about both these directors is that they've been part of the NWRI family from its very beginning. So I want to introduce IRWD Director Pierre Swan. Pierre. And IRWD Director Mary Eileen Mathis. And when I say here from the beginning, when I go back and I see like the original implementing resolutions for member agencies to join NWRI and the committees that kicked off and founded and formed how NWRI would work and how its research would be prosecuted, their fingerprints are all over NWRI even today, so thank you both for your long-term support. In addition, thank you, please. In addition, representing the Clarke Prize co-founder, Joan Irvine Smith, and the Athlete Richardson Clarke Foundation, today we have Mr. Jim Swindon. And Mr. Morton Irvine Smith. As always, we're privileged and pleased to have several of our legacy Clarke Prize laureates in attendance this evening, including Dr. Bruce Rittman, the first Clarke Prize laureate. Bruce and I were talking earlier this evening. He has 100 students in his lab at Northwestern University. They're studying all kinds of things in water. It's incredible work they're doing there. We also have Dr. George Chibanaglas from the University of California, the 2003 Clarke Prize winner. George is also the chair of the Clarke Prize Selection Committee. We also have Vern Snowyk of the University of Illinois at Champaign. We have Jerry Schnoor from the University of Iowa, the 2010 winner. We have Rhodes Trussell, who won in 2013. Rhodes, welcome. And finally, we have our 2016 laureate, Mark Sobsey of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I met earlier today with all the Clarke laureates who are here today, and we had a really good conversation about the future of the Clarke Prize and the future of NWRI, and I feel confident that we're moving forward with a group of laureates who are really committed to helping NWRI grow into this next phase of its development. So I'm really excited about where the future is leading with both the Clarke Prize and with NWRI. I'd also like to take a minute to recognize some folks from our corporate sponsors who are here this evening, and it's an important part of our community here at NWRI. Not only do we work in a world where we're trying to develop great policy in science to drive water resources management that are grounded in science, but we're doing that. We have to do that in a community of people, and that community always includes our corporate sponsors and folks who have been really important to the Institute over many years. And I want to recognize some key folks who are here today. From Trussell Technologies, I wanted to recognize Shane Trussell, the president. Shane? I got you. I wanted to say from CDM Smith, Roshana Kaflaki. Roshana, thank you for coming. And Shane and Roshana are people who, in my prior life as a wastewater utility manager, were very supportive of me as well, so I thank you for your continuing support. And I also wanted to mention a really important partner that's just recently, or I should say more recently, has come into the NWRI family, and that's BioLargo Corporation. Dennis, please, Dennis Calvert's the CEO. BioLargo made a commitment and created a mechanism that we think has a lot of the future in it, where we can partner with them to create a fellowship for a student who's studying an important water research issue, and we had great success in our first evolution, and we're going to use that model to grow the fellowship program in the future. And we think it's a model that'll work both for our corporate associates and for the students as well. And then finally, something that is, in terms of introductions, that my board was very strong on over the first 2 years while I joined NWRI and kind of came into the fold. It was important for us to reach out to some of the other nonprofit, non-governmental entities that are in our same space and that we hadn't necessarily worked with as closely as we should have over the past 4 or 5 years. So it's been a strategic initiative of mine and our NWRI Board of Directors to become more functionally engaged with and work with two groups that are here this evening. Represented first is the Southern California Coastal Water Research Program. Steve Weisberg, the Executive Director there. Steve, welcome. And the second is the UCI Water Program. UCI Water provides a place where interdisciplinary studies can be brought to solve the problems of water. And David Feldman, its Executive Director, is here. David, thank you for joining us this evening. We have an incredible community. I've been so blessed to get to know so many of you here and to really be blessed by the foundational work that's been done at NWRI over almost a generation now to build this community. So I feel very blessed. But just as any community, NWRI has, and we note every year, we have challenges, and one of the biggest challenges, obviously, we're getting up in age. I feel it myself. My goodness, I've already retired from one job. I'm going to be 60 this year. But the reality of life is that sometimes things change, and we've had a lot of transition. And so we lost somebody very close to the NWRI family in the last few weeks, and we want to take just a few moments. I'm going to bring up one of my close colleagues that helped bring me here, but Dr. Jack Skinner was an absolutely incredibly influential person, not only in the space of clean water and the groundwater replenishment system where he was so influential, but he was an incredible member of the Newport Beach community, was involved in a variety of public health issues that speak to this broader community that NWRI is part of here in Orange County. And so I thought it was appropriate to bring up Mike Wayner, the former Assistant General Manager of the Orange County Water District. Just give us a few minutes and talk a little bit about the things that Dr. Skinner contributed to the Orange County community. Mike?
Yeah, I have just a few remarks to share about Jack. You've already gotten kind of the preliminary introduction from Kevin. In August of this past year, current year rather, Jack Skinner passed away at age 88 from breast cancer. We think of breast cancer concerns with women, but men also get breast cancer, and it took Jack's life. Jack survived by a wonderful woman, Nancy Skinner, his wife of 65 years. He met her while he was at Stanford, where he got his medical degree. And they raised their family right here in Newport Beach, right in Orange County. They have two daughters, Susan and Barbie, and Susan is also a physician in Orange County with Kaiser. She's a neurologist with Kaiser. And they've been blessed with 3 wonderful grandchildren as well. Give you a little bit of background on Jack and how he got involved in all this water business. He grew up in LA, went to Hollywood High, spent a lot of time at Hermosa Beach when he was growing up, and became a real lover of the ocean and the beach. And his family acquired a place at Lido Isle, and he spent a lot of time at Lido Isle, Newport Beach, and became really familiar with the ocean environment locally. Well, he didn't really get too involved in water quality until the early 1980s when I was at the health department, and he called to ask about water quality in the area off Laguna Beach where he used to do ocean swimming, distance swimming. And he got really engaged. He was concerned about water quality because he'd had a conjunctivitis case, and I shared with him water quality information that we were generating at the health department. As a result of his involvement with that kind of information, he got much more involved in other issues with water quality. For example, there was a lot of debate at the time about secondary treatment, whether or not secondary treatment should really be required for ocean discharges. And there were utilities in Orange County that had full secondary that wanted to, what EPA referred to as backslide to less than full secondary treatment. And Jack became a strong advocate for full secondary treatment of all wastewater discharge to the ocean in Orange County. He fought to protect water quality in Newport Bay. There were problems that had developed in Newport Bay associated with nutrient runoff from the watershed. And he fought for better protection of water quality and argued for the water districts and regulatory agencies to do a better job of protecting water quality. By the 1980s, this is kind of the next step in the evolution with Jack. The Santa Ana River had really become the dominant source of, it was the dominant source of water supply for the Orange County Water District, for the groundwater basin. But by the 1980s, 1990s especially, it was effluent dominated by discharges from Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And there was a growing concern about the potential impacts that might have on groundwater quality and public health in Orange County. As a result of those concerns, by both the regulatory agencies and the district, Orange County Water District asked staff to implement a study, the Santa Ana River Water Quality and Health Study. That study examined issues ranging from hydrogeology to chemistry, toxicology, microbiology, all kinds of issues to try to ascertain whether or not there was any kind of threat posed to public health from the recharge waters that were being used from the Santa Ana River. After the beginning of the study, we got together with NWRI, which had been fairly recently formed, and asked them to create the first advisory panel. The first advisory panel was what we called the SARWAC, or Santa Ana River Water Quality and Health Study Scientific Advisory Panel. And it was modeled after a panel that the state of California had pulled together in 1986 to assess work that had been done on potable reuse, largely by LA County sanitation districts. And it included some of the same folks, people like Joe Cotruvo and Ken Cantor. When the NWRI panel was formed, Jack Scudder was asked to join that panel. Jack brought a perspective to the panel that we really couldn't have gotten from anyone else. He was both a physician and could bring to it a medical perspective, a public health perspective, as well as a local consumer of the groundwater. So he was in the community that was affected by the water supply as well. We had on the panel, I think there were about 11 members altogether, experts in hydrogeology, chemistry, toxicology, epidemiology, and microbiology. And it included Clarke Prize laureates like Joan Rose and George Stabonaglas. One of the things that Jack did was fulfill this perspective of the medical community as well as the consumers of drinking water that depended on the groundwater basin. And he proved to be a really valuable, a really engaged panel member, respected and valued by his fellow panel members, because he was able to provide this perspective, and he showed so much interest and concern about learning everything about their fields in the process of better understanding the results of the study and helping to guide the study. Jack's value to the panel was so clear that in subsequent years, the State Health Department asked if they could find any other physicians in California that could provide the same kind of expertise for other advisory panels. But there was only one Jack. There wasn't really anybody else that was prepared to devote the kind of energy and interest in water quality issues as Jack did. After the study concluded, which really found that the Santa Ana River recharge was safe, but that Orange County Water District should remain vigilant in any changes in water quality and looking at emerging contaminants, new things that might emerge. Jason can speak to PFAS, for example, concerns about perfluorinated, polyfluorinated substances that could be in the water. In some cases from military bases, in some cases from wastewater discharges. Jack saw in the years that he was subsequently serving on this advisory panel, this next stage advisory panel on monitoring for the Santa Ana River, that there were concerns with water quality in advanced treatment facilities like Water Factor 21. So he became a strong advocate for applying full advanced treatment, that is, reverse osmosis and advanced oxidation, to water that was going to be used for potable purposes. So water that was going to be used to recharge the Orange County groundwater basin. So he became a strong advocate for what groundwater replenishment system became for Orange County, which was a full advanced treatment system for all of the water that's introduced into the ground. Today it's 100 million gallons a day, and before too long 130 million gallons a day of recycled water, the largest potable reuse facility in the world. In addition to the work that he showed, the efforts that he showed really on the panel, Jack always showed real concern for people. One case that I related, my wife's laughed about this story before. I was suffering from bronchitis at one meeting, and Jack offered to go out. He went out to his car and brought in his medical bag, and we went into the restroom. I lifted my shirt so he could listen to my chest, and I'm sure that looked strange to anyone else who came into the restroom at the time. But Jack was very, very concerned about health. He was concerned about individuals, and not just about me. He loved being a physician. His patients loved him, and maybe you'll hear a little bit more from one of his patients in a little bit. He was a really unique individual in terms of his concern about the people that he worked with, both his fellow panel members, in cases like me, somebody who he just happened to work with in terms of providing support for the panel, but concerned about our health and our well-being. He got involved in helping us with information for family members as well who suffered medical concerns. And so Jack was always there for us in terms of trying to help. One of the things that was clear when Jack retired, when he closed his practice, he continued to serve on a volunteer basis with a free clinic that Hoag Hospital puts on. They call the SOS Clinic. And he related to me one time. He actually showed me his medical license where he was allowed to receive zero compensation for his medical services. But he was so delighted. He told me about one case in particular, so delighted with one woman who he'd been able to help, who was dealing with some serious issues. He got a hug from her. She gave him a hug, and that really struck him, that this is somebody who wasn't paying him in money. She was paying him in a hug, and it meant something to Jack. Also, over that same time period, in addition to the things he was doing for us on panels and work he was doing for the free clinic, Jack became aware of the concerns about spinal cord injuries. People diving into shallow waters, diving into sandbanks, and actually suffering spinal cord injuries. In one case, a pretty severe quadriplegic result from it. And so Jack actually worked with Hoag Hospital to create a program called Project Wipeout, which was to train lifeguards in particular how to handle swimmers with spinal cord injuries, to avoid exacerbating problems with these injuries. And that program now has caught on in many other states. It's in Hawaii and other places as well, all as a result of Jack's efforts with Hoag Hospital to get this program established that would help us do a better job of dealing with spinal cord injuries among bathers. Jack's passing was really a huge loss for Orange County. And beyond Orange County, like I mentioned, many of the things he's worked on have spread throughout the country. He's provided support for the medical community. He was head of medical education at Hoag Hospital for a number of years, for over a decade. He obviously contributed to the water community and specifically to the National Water Research Institute by agreeing to be on a couple different panels. He's going to be sorely missed by us, but he'll be remembered by many of us as well. Pierre Swan? Yeah, Pierre would like to come up and say a few words about Jack as well. Pierre is, as you've heard earlier, Pierre is a director with the Irvine Ranch Water District Board.
Thank you very much. So when I married into my family, I assumed to know their medical care. And their medical care was provided by Jack Skinner. I didn't call him Jack at those, it was Dr. Skinner. But I would go to, occasionally you get sick and you go in and see the doctor, and Jack by this time had developed this real interest in the water quality, not only in the ocean, but because he was an active body surfer, but also into the bay. And I was a director at IRWD back in those days, and so he would examine me and try to fix me, and then he would turn around and ask me a whole series of questions. He'd turn the light on and ask and expect that I would have an answer. And if I didn't have an answer, then I would get back to him about water quality, because he was worried about it. We had a bunch of nurseries up in the upper part of the watershed that were dumping tailwater into the bay and causing a lot of nitrates, and then you had algae bloom, and it was degrading the quality of the water in the bay, because occasionally you would have die-off, and all the fish in the bay would float to the surface, and it would cause quite a thing to the community. Later on, IRWD was trying to use its excess recycled water in the winter and, treat it as well as we could, and then put it into the creek system, and then it would flow out the bay out to the ocean. Very good quality water, much better quality water than what was in the existing creek system. But, there was opposition in the community, led by Jack's son-in-law, and which made it a very interesting thing. I would call Dr. Skinner and he'd say, he's my son-in-law, and what do you expect me to do? And it was an interesting deal. It went on, and eventually Jack and I were on a panel that was televised, and we were like the good guys and the bad guys, on opposite ends, and they played one against the other and talking about recycled water and how safe was it. And good thing Dan Oken wasn't here, but so I took a glass of recycled water and I drank it in front of him, much to his horror. And and it went over well in the panel and on TV, I guess. And a couple of days later, I get a note from Jack, a get well quick card. We talk a lot about Jack, but Jack was, half of a team. Jack and Nancy, were there for the community and looking after water quality. Not only did he have, breast cancer, but he was also losing, his recollection of a number of things. I remember him as always a gentleman. I've never heard him raise his voice. Always a class act. We need more of those people in this time of strife and invective that we throw at each other. We would be well to, take lessons from Jack. Thank you.
So each year, as part of this event, we try to take just a moment, and I'll try to be brief, to talk about and place into context the work that NWRI does. And we've done this through a variety of different mechanisms. The last couple of years, we've talked about art and tried to connect art to the broader creative scene and the need to be creative to solve our water resources challenges. But this year, as the investments made by the NWRI Board of Directors and its strategic plan begin to pay dividends, the Institute has nearly doubled the number of active projects in our research portfolio. And our resources, our expertise, our leadership is in really high demand today. And I sense a bright future for us. But if NWRI is a leader in large degree, it's because of our member agencies. One of the pleasures I've had in this job is to meet brilliant people. Last night I had dinner with Paul, and my wife and I had dinner with Paul and his wife Kelly, and we talked about the fact that it's easy to take for granted the work that the NWRI member agencies have done and the impact that they've had across the world on water recycling. So let's talk about how they inspire those member agencies, how they inspire both the folks that work at NWRI and folks that we come in contact with around the world. At West Basin, they started their transformation they were just an imported water wholesaler back in the early 80s and 90s, but when the droughts came along, they received some federal funding to build the Edward C. Little plant, which, as many of you know, just went through its most recent upgrade and beautiful event a few weeks ago. Today, that facility produces 40 million gallons of usable water every day. That conserves enough water for 80,000 households a year. The facility produces 5 different qualities of custom-made recycled water that meet the unique needs of West Basin's municipal, commercial, and industrial customers for a wide variety of industrial irrigation uses, industrial irrigation, and groundwater replenishment uses. And working with the Water Replenishment District in Los Angeles, West Basin supplies 75% of the water injected into the West Coast groundwater barrier, which conserves another 5,000 acre-feet of water a year. And that's just West Basin. LADWP, the Los Angeles Department of Water Power, they provided recycled water in the city of Los Angeles since 1982. The recycled water keeps the landscape healthy in the areas of Griffith Park, along the Mount Sinai and Forest Lawn Memorial Lawn parks. And so LADWP has made recycling a key strategy of the Urban Water Management Plan, and its blueprint, which is its blueprint for creating a reliable and resilient source of water for a future in the city of Los Angeles. And LADWP has embarked on this goal to increase the amount of recycled water use in the city to 59,000 acre-feet by 2035, which is an incredible goal, and they're well on their way. They're currently expanding both their water recycle program to include both groundwater replenishment, utilizing advanced treatment purified water to recharge the groundwater supplies, and through a large purple pipe system. And so as the city's imported water supply becomes more critical, so does the need to expand LADWP's local sustainable water resources, so they're actively partnering with the Los Angeles Bureau of Sanitation and the West Basin Municipal Water District to explore opportunities for potable reuse at the Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant. At IEUA, they've collaborated now, working hard on the Chino Basin, with the Chino Basin Water Master, the Chino Basin Water Conservation District, and other collaborators in the region on the Chino Basin Recycled Groundwater Recharge Program. It's an integral part to shaping the Inland Empire's water future, make sure they've got a reliable source of water. Their groundwater recharge infrastructure consists of an entire network of pipelines that direct stormwater runoff, water that's imported from the State Water Project, and recycled water to 16 different recharge sites that are located throughout their nearly 250 square mile service area, and are designed to hold the water so that it percolates down, we don't have to pump it, and replenish the alluvial aquifers and the groundwater supply in their region. They currently do that to the tune of 40 to 50,000 acre feet a year. From Northern California, they do 15 to 25,000 acre feet of stormwater, depending on the year, and up to 10,000 acre feet of recycled water. This program not only will mitigate future water shortages in their region, but future water shortages across the region, and provide for subsurface reserve of groundwater for local use if we need it. And at IRWD, they've been a national leader in water recycling from their beginning. They've got achievements dating back to 1963, when its board of directors implemented a vision to integrate water recycling into the entire design of the community. IRWD currently meets almost 25% of its total water demand with recycled water. And while that recycled water is a key component of their water efficiency program, they also produce and distribute tertiary treated recycled water throughout the service area for landscape, for agricultural irrigation, and it says 80% of the public and commercial irrigated landscape in the IRWD service area is irrigated using recycled water. So it's an important part of every one of our 4 member agencies, and as we move forward and look forward, or all 6 of our member agencies, and one of the most exciting things that's happening right now is the final expansion of the GWRS, and 2 of our member agencies are cooperating on that project. At OCSD, not only they're an internationally recognized wastewater management utility, but OCSD has set the gold standard for wastewater agency partnering to support potable reuse. This partnership began back with Water Factory 21, the first of its kind water recycling facility that helped pave the way for many of these international projects and ultimately the groundwater replenishment system in the 1990s. So today OCSD supplies GWS and OCWD with stringently controlled secondary treated wastewater at no charge. And in addition, the 2 agencies have developed and implemented an aggressive education and outreach program to build upon the public's trust and overwhelming support for this unprecedented water recycling project. And through that collaboration, GWRS has emerged as one of the most celebrated civil engineering and water reuse projects in the world. And I know this because I go around the world to go to these conferences, and there isn't a conference presentation that occurs that some consultant somewhere doesn't take responsibility for GWRS. Happens to every conference, every program, everybody's got a piece of it. It's amazing. And in thinking about this final expansion, we just had, most recently just had a meeting of the GWS Independent Advisory Panel. OCWZ is about to break ground on the final expansion of the groundwater replenishment system in just a few weeks. This $300 million project will take production from what it's currently at 100 million gallons a day of high-quality water to 130 million gallons a day, which is enough for 1 million people. The project's going to be completed in 2023, and Just as OCWD is at the forefront of water reuse, it's invested resources to become the first lab in California to be certified for tests for PFOA and PFOS, which are in that family of PFAS chemicals known as the forever chemicals that we mentioned earlier. So prevalent in the environment, and containing and removing these PFAS contamination will be one of the water industry's most challenging issues it faces in the next decade. This fall, OCWD is starting a pilot project to test various treatment methods for PFAS and is working closely with the state and national regulators, NWRI, and other stakeholders to help address this issue. And so it is that each of the NWRI member agencies continues the good work of enhancing the efficiency and the effectiveness of their respective water resource management investments. And this inspires all of us, and indeed the takeaway I'd like to leave with you this evening is that this work that's so vital, that makes our economy here in Orange County so vibrant, and the quality of our life, frankly, unsurpassed, inspires us not only in the close orbit being around these luminary leaders. The work has inspired, and I know this is true, an entire generation of water leaders around the world. And this has given them confidence to create a secure water future in their own communities. And as a former water executive in a smaller community where we didn't have some of these challenges, but now those challenges are starting to raise their hackles, that confidence gives public utilities, their managers and their elected officials confidence to invest in solutions to their community, solutions that make sense for their community and solve their community's problems. This would not happen without the leadership shown by the NWRI member agencies. So I want to thank the NWRI member agencies for what they've done in terms of supporting the broader community, but most importantly for the folks that I see who are coming to us from around the United States, whether they're in Colorado or in Maryland or in New Mexico, and who want to follow this trail that you've blazed. Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I hope you can remember that as long as we continue to solve the problems that are presented here in California, these problems as we solve them may seem old hat to us, but to the rest of the world, they're looking to see how we're solving these problems so they can decide what will work best for them and their communities. So thank you very much for your support. And now without further ado, I want to bring up Jim Swindon of the Athlete Richard Clarke Joan Irvine Smith Foundation to give you a few words about the history and the legacy of the Clarke Prize and to set up this evening's lecture. Jim?
Good evening. According to this timer, Kevin, I have actually 30 seconds left, so we'll make it fast. Kevin asked me to speak this night, and many of you heard me talk before, and we've had slide presentations, things, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about how the Clarke Prize came about. And when I was reflecting upon it, I thought back, well, where'd this really start from? And it actually, in my mind, begins pre-1900s. And in today's world, I'm always amazed by the general public, our political leaders, and the news media when they really go off about, we're in a horrible drought. Well, guess what? We live in a desert. We're in a perpetual drought. Consequently, the Spaniards knew that, the Mexicans knew that, the early settlers knew that, and in the 1800s, every 10 years or so, people would be totally devastated or wiped out because we would have a drought. Well, no surprise, really. In our family, the first person who actually took that head on was our great-grandfather, James Irvine II. And he was the one that realized that water was all important for this very large piece of land that he was actually inherited, which now consists of about a fifth of Orange County. So the Irvine Company, over the years, drilled over 1,000 wells on the property. Now, their former partners, the Bixby's, they drilled about 3 and they got oil, and they're just a little bit up the road. So, you know, not everything's fair in life, right? But he not only drilled those wells, he also created the reservoirs, and he created the infrastructure to create but is arguably, at one point in time during the 40s and 50s, the largest agricultural concern in the United States. There was over 50,000 acres under agriculture on this ranch. That was a huge amount of acreage to be productive, and he was totally involved with this. Unfortunately, our grandfather passed very early in life, and so the next person that took up the mantle about the water was my mother, I should say our mother. And she actually was indoctrinated by her great-grandfather when she visited the ranch. He would go out and he would show her every single new orange tree that was planted, all the irrigation ditches, all the reservoirs, all the pumps, everything in terms of the water distribution systems. And so she got really a first-hand knowledge about water and became passionate. And as many of you know in this room, when our mother became passionate about something, she could be a force to be contended with. And so it really was her tenacity, her drive, with many of you in this room that created what we have in Orange County, which is, as Kevin has mentioned, is the foremost, basically, water production, conservation, treatment, and sustainable, district and also program in the world. And we have it right here in Orange County. And she was extremely passionate about it. But she was also passionate about recognizing those individuals who were dedicated to water conservation and also research. And so the Clarke Prize came out of that, and she named it for her mother. And my grandmother, our grandmother, actually was on the ranch at the time that these improvements were being made, and she, in her own right, was a farmer. She had her own property separate from the Irvine family. She was extremely successful. She served on the state agricultural board for years, and so my mother thought it was fitting that it would be named in honor of her, so that's why we have the Athlete Clarke Award. Going forward, in our generation, my brothers and I, we are committed to go forward, and not only on the research aspect, but also in education, because we'd really like to get past that surprise about we're in a drought, because we need to understand that, we need how to be able to fix it and go forward with it. But when I was asked to speak, I told Kevin, I said, it's really not about our family and this prize. It's really about the agencies that Kevin has mentioned and what they've done and their accomplishments. It's obviously about the laureates that are here this evening, both the past laureates, our present laureate, and those who will come in the future. But in reality, it's really about every one of you in this room, because it's your drive, your ambition, your knowledge, and your ability to be able to basically preserve one of the most precious resources we have. So thank you.
So now I'm going to introduce the 2003 Clarke Prize laureate and the chair of the Clarke Prize Selection Committee to introduce this, the 2019 Clarke Prize laureate. Now, typically this job would fall to the person who nominated this year's laureate, but because Pedro can't be with us today, George is going to provide the introduction. So, Dr. Jabanaglas.
From an old professor, you'd expect notes on yellow paper, but they're on white. And it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce the 2019 Clarke Prize laureate, Dr. Paul Westerhoff. Paul is currently the Regents Professor and the Fulton Chair of the Environmental Engineering in the Ira A. Fulton Schools of Environment Engineering at Arizona State University. He's also Dean of Research and Innovation. Paul will tell you more about himself, so I won't steal his thunder. But I'm going to focus my remarks on the Clarke Prize. And the important thing to understand about Paul Westerhoff is that he is the embodiment of the Clarke Prize goals and aspirations. He is the embodiment of the Clarke Prize goals and aspirations. There are 4 criteria, and they're shown here. And just to review: accomplishments, active engagement, public outreach, leadership. In each of these areas, Paul excels. Just a couple of examples. His stature as chair of the Environmental Engineering Department and the innovative research is really a reflection of his many accomplishments in teaching, research, and public service. For example, if I were to read his list of accomplishments and medals, there would be no time for his talk. With respect to teaching, in addition to teaching and other activities, Paul is also actively engaged in these three organizations. He is director of the EPA Center for Life Cycle and Nanomaterials, deputy director of the NSF Nanosystems Engineering Research Center for Nanotechnology-Enabled Water Treatment. I've never seen so many big words. And finally, he is senior sustainability science at the Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability. Paul's public outreach is through speaking, through writing, and through service on professional committees. In all of these endeavors, he has sought to champion the concept of one water. One water as being the most effective way of ensuring water sustainability in the future. With respect to writing, he is in the upper 1% of all environmental engineering authors. In fact, he may be at the top, but he is in the upper 1%. With respect to leadership, his leadership in interdisciplinary research related to water supplies and water treatment has led to significant developments in improved watershed management, enhanced public health, safer drinking water, and improved water treatment. And finally, I think one important thing to know about his record is, and one conclusion you can draw about his record, is that Paul never sleeps. So, without further ado, please welcome the 2019 Clarke Prize laureate, Dr. Paul Westerhoff.
I think we're going to get some photos, but well, we're taking some photos. Why doesn't everyone just stand up for a minute and stretch a little bit, right?
Stretch,
Yeah.
And I would like to invite my brother to come up. So on behalf of the Joan Irvine Smith and NWRI Clarke Foundation, it's my great privilege and privilege to give you and award you the 2019 Clarke Prize.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks again. Great. So, I'm really excited to kind of share and kind of celebrating the legacy of water leadership that we heard about today, both by NWRI and the Joan Irvine Smith and Athlete Richardson Clarke Foundation, who is represented by Jim and his family members. So thanks a lot. So I'm going to try to have fun a little bit tonight. There's some humor kind of mixed in with my slides. My students are here. Will hopefully acknowledge my humor is a little dry sometimes, but hopefully you'll get it. So what I'm trying to do is to think of looking, into a crystal ball of some sort tonight. So think about that as we go through tonight. And I'm going to hopefully kind of take you, kind of start out a little bit broad, kind of narrow in. I'm going to start by acknowledging some important mentors and kind of just an unexpected journey. They asked me to talk just a little bit about kind of who I am and where I came from. And then I'm going to talk about some of the great things engineers have done. How many engineers are in here? All right, yeah, so engineers are great, right? And so I'm going to talk about how great engineers are and how they've saved the world, or maybe not. So if you're not an engineer, maybe that's a good thing. I was asked to give a few examples of my work that kind of help tell this story, and then I'll kind of try to back out and try to think about, what are the big challenges in society? And we think water's one of them, sure, but I'll think about how we link some of the other ones to thinking about human health and the ecosystem. So we all have, we heard great stories today about some mentors and people who have inspired us. Mine are up here for sure, my parents. My dad has a saying, trout don't live in ugly places, and I respect that a lot because I love the water, I love skiing, I love fly fishing, I like getting out there. And my mom has a saying, life is the sum of all your choices. And so I think we can both kind of reflect upon these, one that is, under your control of some sort, but when you go out into nature, you get to kind of reflect upon them. There's probably too many students, collaborators, sponsors, and families to acknowledge, but I'd like to point out just a few of them here. So I got my master's at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and on the far left here, John Tobiasen was my advisor, and he really started teaching me the idea of linking science and why it's important to do it. So it was really important. And then after I moved to Colorado and decided to stay there, Gary Amy, who's here, this was the best picture of him because he's always smiling. If you know Gary, he's just the happiest guy in the world. And as an advisor, that was very supportive in what he allowed me to do. He could really allow me to do anything I wanted and kind of pursue collaborations across the country and sometimes next door. So the next picture up here is George Aiken. George, I met in Colorado. He was part of my PhD committee. He worked at the U.S. Geological Survey, and I think really exemplifies what it means to be kind of a government employee. Sometimes they're overlooked for sure, but he really had this deep knowledge and deep passion for what he did. He liked organic matter and beer. And so he would oftentimes take me out to get a beer, show me a dark ale and a light amber, and talk about the humic and fulvic acids in these things. And if you know George, his passion is to extract that organic matter and characterize it using really high-tech types of equipment, but then to say, why does it matter? And so he taught me how to write journal papers. He taught me how to write research proposals. And then Stuart, who's over here tonight, I'm really glad he could come, is another example, I think, of one of the mentors in my life of kind of several. But Stuart sits right between the ability to understand what water utilities are doing. He worked for MWD, recently retired. But he was also able to talk to professors. And that is a very unique skill set. And for us, it was helping us translate our research findings into practice. And so, Stuart, I really appreciate all your help. And then a little bit more about me. This is a dark picture, and it's supposed to be a little dark. It's a chapel on an island in a lake. So this is where I grew up. I had water in my backyard. It rained all the time. I could go out boating. Water was no problem. I never really thought too much about it. It was a place to have fun. That's about it. Then I moved to Colorado, and I realized, there's a little less water in Colorado. And then I moved to Arizona, and there was even less water in Arizona. I was actually asked to move to Saudi Arabia at one time, and that would have been even drier, but fortunately that one didn't make it on here. So, I think what kind of this, movement across the country, and kind of a theme, again, is going to be kind of spatial themes or geospatial unintended consequences, is actually this kind of, unexpected journey of sorts really taught me that water's local. It's very different. You perceive water very differently depending upon your experience, and that water's for a lot more than drinking. I went fishing here, I went fishing there, and I try to go fishing here. But, other people enjoy doing things other than drinking the water. And so both water quantity and quality is often worth fighting for. We'll see this a little bit about whiskey in Texas later, so just keep an eye open for that. So, I think where we come from, and we heard a lot about California today, but there's a lot of places outside of California. And so I'm going to try to talk about some of those stories a little bit. So when I moved to Arizona, I'd worked with someone from the USGS. They introduced me to other people in Arizona. And one of the first papers was with collaborators from the U.S. Geological Survey. And we looked at Arizona and looked at Central Phoenix, a few million people in the middle of a desert. And we did an analysis. It turns out that 95% of the liquid water that comes into the Phoenix area never leaves as liquid water. Only 5% leaves. So all the other water is reused and essentially evaporated. And so in Arizona, this idea of one water is just kind of part of living in a desert. So then the question is, what's my part of this? And they were doing this far before I came there, far before One Water came up as a concept. So I decided to kind of think about where my little orbitals around One Water are. And they're a little minutiae, right? So academics tend to keep falling back to the most basic parts of what we work on. So I like organic matter, stuff in beer, but other things in water. Oxidants, whether it's ozone, chlorine, or other disinfectants, and nitrogen. Ever since I moved to Arizona, my first project was on nitrate, and you'll see kind of a journey looking at nitrogen in water. So it's really carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen and oxygen. It's kind of like what we're made out of, right? And so that's why I kind of put in this idea that sometimes we think of One Water as infrastructure, but really we're all made of these things that we think about in water. So this One Water concept should be thought of at a very small level all the way up to the global scale. So hopefully that tells you a little bit more about me. But then what I want to do is to say what our forefathers in engineering have done. There's been some great accomplishments, and so the dinner we had tonight is one example of this. I know it's hard to see, but these are years. This is about 1950, and then this is grain production. So somewhere in there, someone discovered the Haber-Bosch process, the ability to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, and we can make a lot more food and to feed people. And I think we all think that food is a good thing. So this was definitely an engineering accomplishment. This is a relationship between energy and gross domestic product. So as you have more energy, your GDP of your country goes up. So clearly electrification has enabled technical processes, but on a more personal level, right, it allowed kind of reading after dark and education for us to really get out and be able to be creative. And of course, you know what the next one is, right? What's the next one? Water. Okay, thanks. And so, there's been great accomplishments, and we always pat ourselves on the back about, solving, decreasing the rate of typhoid and other waterborne diseases through chlorination and filtration. And, we acknowledge how great we are because we increase the life expectancies by 5 to 10 years through these practices. So there's no question that these are fabulous accomplishments, right? But I'd say some of them have led to what I'm calling unintended geospatial consequences for the ecosystem and people, right? So the first one here is food, right? So I told you we needed to make nitrogen out of the atmosphere. So what are the geospatial consequences of that? Jerry's from Iowa, somewhere in this green area. This is nitrogen leaching off of agricultural lands into the Mississippi, into the Gulf of Mexico, forms this dead zone, an oxygen-deprived zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So clearly, we're here in California, we're eating food from there, but we're also eating food from a little bit north of here in the Salinas Valley, which flows into Monterey Bay. I think the lettuce today on our plate probably came from the Salinas Valley, feeds the entire country. But these are nitrogen hotspots, and going into the Monterey Bay, actually we heard this morning about these severe eutrophication problems. So these things that we want and these great accomplishments of things like nitrogen lead to these very unintended consequences. I bet you're starting to think, what am I going to say about water, huh? But let's first look at energy. I think we all know that, our ability to produce fuels have relied upon, hydrocarbons. And this has increased the CO2 levels in the atmosphere and has increased global temperature climates. But just like these effects of nitrogen are geospatially located, not everyone feels the damage the same. The same thing's going on globally. Where you are, your experience, and what's going on to climate change, whether it's increasing sea rise, whether it's melting snow, whether it's stronger storms, or in north, even polar bears that need to swim more, right? Where you are is going to affect the footprint that you're feeling from these changes. So I bet you're still thinking, what's wrong with water, right? What did we do? So I had to think about it a little bit just to be able to tell a story. So the geospatialness here really started with John Snow, and it has to be the original John Snow, right, in the 1850s, and with this ghost map of mapping out cholera in London. And so he understood the geospatial nature that local water is oftentimes local. And so what's bad about this? We solved this problem, right? So I would argue that one of the unintended consequences, not that it's bad, but one of the unintended consequences has been the movement of people into cities. We can solve these sanitation challenges because of these technologies. So there's mega cities all over the world. These are now hotspots of culture, art, economic drivers. But it is an unintended consequence of being able to disinfect and provide, sanitation to people. So that's good, isn't it? I don't know. Some people would argue that, cities, whether it's Hong Kong or these other cities, they're also not only great places of learning, but also great challenges for society. And if you don't live in these mega cities, are you somehow overlooked? So there are consequences of everything that we do. But, so there are other downsides, or what are some of the other unintended consequences of chlorinating water, right? So chlorine, saves lives. Good job, right? Somewhere along there, we found that people could suffer not just from acute microbial risks, but from other things in terms of byproducts of chlorine in water, or disinfection byproducts. And clearly, about the 1980s, the EPA started regulating disinfection byproducts in water. These are things that cause cancer after many years of exposure. So we solved one problem, and we applied kind of a hammer of sorts to hit this chlorine problem. But now we are producing these carcinogens in water. So over time, people have thought about, let's limit the use of chlorine. So you can kind of see this like full circle. Less chlorine is good now. And not only we can manage it so we don't get as many of those pathogens in our water, but by limiting the use of chlorine to produce fewer DBPs, it led to some choices. And all these unintended consequences have choices along the way. So one of the choices you could have made was to remove the organics, remove those, tannins and flavored beer, fulvic acids from water, through activated carbon or membranes. And I'd say this is a path somewhat less traveled because it's expensive. And somewhere in here, I don't know the year, but somewhere in here, dollars seemed far more important than they did for John Snow. For John Snow, it was about improving public health, not so much about dollars. So the path less taken was really the switch to chloramines. So with chloramines, these are little diagrams here. With free chlorine, it's big. You form a lot of disinfection byproducts. With chloramines, you formed less, and you could meet the regulation. But as a percent of the pie, red is never good, you have a more percent of those byproducts that you don't know what they are. You can't measure them. You don't even know what you're looking for. You don't know their toxicity. You don't know the risk. So you're making a choice for something that maybe you know and understand, for something that you don't. But it's definitely a path that was taken. And there's other unintended consequences. Mark Edwards did a fantastic job exploring corrosion issues in Washington, D.C. that led to lead in drinking water as an effect of changing from free chlorine to chloramines. So these unintended consequences, no one would want to do these things, or maybe they weren't necessarily foreseeable back then. And maybe there's tools today that we can think about how to do this better. So as I said, my little world looks at a lot of organic nitrogen. Here I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. I like nitrogen. We did a lot of fun work looking at nitrogen in water treatment plants, whether they're free amino acids. These are things that we think are good for us, but when you chlorinate these amino acids, they form disinfection byproducts. And it turns out that amino acids are also in a lot of other things that we use. A lot of our pharmaceuticals contain organic nitrogen. A lot of our personal care products contain amine groups. And so this thing that we didn't worry about too much starts to become more important as we change our type of disinfection, because these all contribute to forming nitrogen-based disinfection byproducts, which tend to be potentially of higher risk out there. However, all the drinking water treatment plants are largely designed to remove what are called humic acids or hydrophobic materials that absorb onto activated carbon. But most of this organic nitrogen are in a base fraction. It may represent only 5 or 10% of the organic carbon, but it represents about 80% of the nitrogen. And so our drinking water plants have not been designed to address these at all. So what could we do? We could invent a new treatment plant, right? A new treatment process. Take care of that one. Keep crossing it off. Another hammer, another tool in our box. However, it kind of becomes this game of whack-a-mole, right? And so whoever has the biggest hammer, you just keep bopping them on the head, solve one problem, maybe creates another problem. But were any of these necessarily foreseeable? So we have lots of technologies out there. Maybe we're all in search of Thor's super hammer here. One technology, maybe it's, right now California thinks that's the gold standard, MFROAOP, right? And that's Thor's hammer, and that'll take care of everything. However, in Israel, they're actually rethinking desalination altogether because they're taking out too many things. And the trace nutrients that were once in water to affect us have been taken out too far. So maybe it's too big of a hammer. And so the question is, where in here is the right place to look? Or is this even the approach that we want to take in solving these problems? And there's new tools to allow us to think about this. This was a fun kind of thought exercise and paper. And it's actually kind of in eastern California. In Arizona, I have to say it's to the west, but it's in eastern California. And here's a community that 3,000 people drinking groundwater for many years, but now it has arsenic in it. And there was a regulation in 2001 that said you have to remove the arsenic, next contaminant of the day back then. So we looked at 3 different types of treatment: ion exchange, activated alumina, and an iron treatment system. And you could buy them in different places. You could buy one from China, one from Germany, and one from Houston. So we used life cycle analysis, and most people who use life cycle analysis think about CO2, global climate impacts. But LCA is a powerful tool because it lets you look at other things. One of them are cancer and cancer risk. So if I make ion exchange material in Houston, Texas, I use chemicals that are carcinogenic, and you can express these as benzene equivalents. But some number of cancer cases, 4 or 5 cancer cases, could be formed because I'm buying this option to install in California. The health risk of arsenic is about 1 in 10,000 people will be avoided of getting cancer from arsenic if you meet the regulation. So 1 in 10,000 people, but here I'm potentially putting 3 or 4 people at risk of cancer somewhere else in the world. So this nice little city in Coachella, is going to reduce their health risk, but what does that do? What's that trade-off? How many lives am I moving or displacing? We really wanted to call this paper Exporting Cancer, because to put in this treatment technology in California meant somewhere in the world, workers or the environment was going to be having chemicals put out there into it. And it all really comes back to what you want your arsenic regulation to be, whether the line of the benefit from removing it from water either saves lives or doesn't save lives. And so this idea of geospatially dislocating our effect of putting in treatment systems, which is good, reduce the arsenic risk, but having impact somewhere else in the world on a different community. So that got us thinking a lot, and it's this idea of life cycle thinking. And George, there's a lot of words and letters, but it's a fun acronym, NWRI, kind of like the slimy little thing, right? It has a membrane and water goes back and forth on it. So you don't have to remember all the letters and names, just NWRI. That's the name of our center. And Anjali back here is one of my students. She helped come up with this really cool, NWRI on a surfboard, pretty suiting for California, right? And surfing on a wave with, this is a fullerene, a nano material in it. So in this center, one of the things that we're really trying to do, and it builds on that arsenic example, is we're trying to use new materials. So we're trying to use less chemicals, but energize nanotechnology, nanomaterials differently. So we use an entire spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum, from UV through visible light to infrared, microwave, and other wavelengths to activate nanoparticles without adding chemicals. We also can do other things in terms of high surface area, electrical conductance, magnetism, tune the surfaces of membranes and other things. But the idea here is to be able to change a paradigm. Instead of having, and we're seeing this going on across the world, instead of one large centralized water treatment plant, there's increasingly larger numbers of decentralized systems, all the way down to things we have in our homes. Now, we're not going to walk around with buckets of hydrochloric acid in our homes, but we can walk around with lights, things like light-emitting diodes, to drive these types of things. So we're really trying to create a new template on creating a new water vision. And so I'll give just one of these examples here. And it's one that we're calling the germicidal glow stick, kind of a fun name. But we're trying to understand how we can disinfect water differently, not just replacing chlorine with UV light, and not just replacing mercury lamps with light-emitting diodes, but really thinking about where do opportunistic biofilms and pathogens form. They don't form in the central water treatment plant. We can control things really good there. It's after it leaves, after it gets into your home, after it gets into the lines in your refrigerator, after it goes into the hot water tanks in our parents' lawn care facilities where they get exposed to Legionella. That's where these problems are. It's not necessarily in our surface water treatment plants. So what we've done is kind of fun. We attach a light-emitting diode. And does anyone have a cell phone? Oh, you got one. Okay. Thanks. So can you take yours out for a minute? And so how big is the little LED on the back there? There you go. It's a pretty small LED. It's pretty bright, but it only has a few millimeter kind of, I should have everyone stand up and just wave there. Yeah. No, thanks, Shane. So it's a little bright. So it's a really small area of emission. And so imagine, how do you get light into these pipes and into hot water tanks and different things? So we came up with the idea of putting optical fibers on them, kind of the things that transmit, our signals in our fiber optics to our home so we can watch Netflix and things. But what we do is we put nanoparticles on them, and those nanoparticles turn this thing that projects light one direction to one that will glow it out. So we can increase the surface area that it emits this light over. We do it through nanotechnology, but no nano with nano, we kill things, right? So you just take me for granted that putting the nanomaterials on here allows us to control biofilms really well. And this has really started a new this whole center was a new theme in my life, because there was one that really led to how do we patent technologies? How do I make a better hammer? Hammers aren't always good, that we'll see, but sometimes it's fun to make things. We are engineers. So my wife and I have started a company. We got funding from NASA, and maybe we'll be able to put these fibers in space one day, or at least somewhere that we know of. So I'm going to skip this other example. It's really just the fact that sometimes you should look at the problems of the day, these PFAS that were talked about, but nitrate is out there. It's actually the world's most commonly occurring groundwater pollutant of human origin, US, Europe, China. And so, it causes a lot of the different violations. And we used to think, nitrate was just affecting infants and the ability of infants to take up oxygen into their blood. But Stuart has actually done some really nice epidemiology work to show that nitrate has stronger correlations in Iowa to THMs, to bladder cancer than does THMs, which we currently regulate. There's a whole number of cancers which new epidemiology studies are showing caused by nitrate, and nitrate's been implicated as an endocrine disruptor. So if I listed these things up there without the word nitrate, you would be worried about it, right? And the regulations or the health effect levels that we'd expect for these should be in the 1 to 5 milligram per liter nitrogen level. So sometimes these old pollutants, which we think meet regulations, we shouldn't worry about. But clearly, some of these are important. And so it's these types of large problems which we'd argue existing technologies don't really solve. They only move around through separation systems. We want to develop destruction systems. Or really, drinking water treatment has a lot of advanced oxidation processes. We want to create more advanced reduction processes. So we're doing this within this Newt Center. So, good, right? We can solve problems like nitrate, develop a new hammer, a new treatment technology. But I'm not sure if we're really still even going down the right road. Not to criticize, Kevin, but you talked about more water. More water in California is good. And so, the global market for desalination's $27 billion by middle of next century. That's huge, right? That's a lot of money, right? However, when you look at the market of bottled water, it's already over $300 billion a year. And point-of-use devices are already larger than the desalination market. What does this tell us? It tells us that consumers are not happy. They expect you to deliver water quantity, but it's the quality and the perception of the water that they're not happy with. And this is a really important driver that's changed, and that has different geospatial kind of institutions. So at one time, we thought this was the right model. Cities should deliver really high-quality water in the street. Anything after that, you're responsible for. But whether it's Flint, Michigan, Newark, New Jersey, we know that these issues of health of lead occur inside these buildings. Legionella is inside the buildings. It's not out in the street. So we're good engineers, but sometimes we have to break our old models and really take ownership of these water systems because we want to be more like John Snow, that is, protect human health. That's what motivated John Snow. He didn't say, no, regulations say I can stop here. He was really there to save and improve the quality of the water. Then we have other great things for sustainability. George mentioned I was part of this School of Sustainability, and LEED certified buildings. These are great things. You reduce the amount of energy, you reduce the amount of water, right? Are there any unintended consequences in these LEED certified buildings? Yes, I see some nods. Like what? Any thoughts? Huh? Reducing water temperatures. You know, I'd argue, so we've had fun on a building on campus. It's a pretty building. It's LEED certified. It reduces 60% of the water use in these buildings, water conservation at its most. It reduces energy. It improves air quality. Well, here's a nice analogy. If on air quality, they control the airflow, the temperature of the air, particles in the air, and humidity. What do we control on water quality? Water. How much do you get? You want it. Right? We don't really control water quantity and quality in buildings, even like we do on air. So it turns out in this building, as the building came online and as occupancy increased, you know, we have a building that I'm in, and copper's over 1 milligram per liter. If you're on the 6th floor of the building, it's over 1.5 milligrams per liter. There's no chlorine in the water. These buildings that we've created to be conserving water actually consume the chlorine. The water stays in these pipes a long time and becomes high risk of things like copper in these buildings. So what's the solution? I don't know. Remember, they put in bottled water for 6 months, but that costs too much. And so, you know, you can try to fix these things, but sometimes you're not aware of the real problem. So we've been having fun. We can model these buildings now. We actually tried really expensive sensors. All we need is your cell phone again. Hold up your cell phone again. And so, you know, when you log into your cell phone and you push, you know, Wi-Fi, all these Wi-Fi nodes link up, right? And so it turns out when you go into any building, your phone is pinging the Wi-Fi nodes. It doesn't mean you're logging on, but it knows people are there. So we can actually track occupancy in the building, and as occupancy increases, water use increases, and actually the water quality gets better. So in an artificial intelligent world or machine learning world, we'd know the pattern of people coming into a building, we'd recirculate the water ahead of time. In this building, do you know what the solution was for, you know, solving their water quality problems of copper? Any guesses? No, it's to have the janitors turn on the faucets on every floor at night for 3 hours. Right? So they went from conserving 60% of the water to only 30% of the water. Right? And so in a smart system, that's our acronym. In a smart system, you should be able to recognize those water quality savings while having very high quality. So we really need to think of these things more in touch, because in our building, you know, now we actually set up an atmospheric water capture device to just take water out of the atmosphere. Eats a lot of energy. It doesn't solve necessarily the problem, but the water tastes good. So are green buildings or are these other things useful? So again, engineers can come to the rescue. We can solve copper problems. We can put in artificial networks and do things. But does that really improve success or lead to success? So we still have a little more to go into here before we kind of come fully out, but we're going to start coming out a little bit. I'm not going to talk about any more hammers. Hammers are fun. This is what we publish papers on, right? And it's good stuff. But, you know, are we really leading to success? So there's things that we used to do. Spray DDT to, you know, control infectious bugs. This is not a good idea. We don't do this anymore. But do we do anything similar to it? Are we really looking at what society is doing? So in the 1980s, there was this tagline, better living through chemistry. Look at this trend. It went from nothing to a lot. That's all you need to happen. But it's prescription drugs and the amount of money people are spending on prescription drugs. It's a pretty clear trend. This one's on cocaine, right? And it's a similar trend also. But when trends like this are happening, we wait a decade to say, maybe we should measure pharmaceuticals in water, right? That's when we thought about that somewhere in here, but this trend was already going on. There's trends in society that we know are going to impact water. We just don't think about it. We try to ignore it. We say our hammers are going to take care of it. But what does this really mean for society? And what's this trade-off? And what's our role in saying water is truly safe to drink? Not that it just meets every regulation, but it's truly safe. So we care about pharmaceuticals, and we could add another technology. But where do we add that technology? Does everyone need it? Do you need it on every tap? So what we tried to do is to think about this in one of our studies. And so, Dan, you'll kind of appreciate this one a little bit. But, we ended up having a study trying to understand disinfection byproducts again. And what we realized is we discovered a chemical called methadone. So methadone is there for treating heroin addiction, but it's actually prescribed and used a lot more for back pain, right? So if you suffer from back pain, there's definitely individuals who benefit, from these pharmaceuticals. However, I'd argue that methadone, and once it goes into wastewater, into a river, into a treatment plant, that people are chloraminating at, and about 50% of the US population now drinks chlorinated water, and it forms nitrosodimethylamine, a potential carcinogen. Methadone is really the only chemical I know, pharmaceutical, that actually forms a carcinogen later on in drinking water, actually at a few nanograms per liter of environmentally relevant concentrations. So you're taking this benefit for a few and potentially increasing risk for a lot. This is common, right? There's all types of trade-offs that we have. And so I think as we think about this and other examples, and really going back to the idea that chlorination was practiced before people made them do it, and improved human health. But now drug addiction is clearly a national epidemic. People are going to continue to take and use prescribed medicines. It improves the quality of life and the extension of life. But maybe we need to really think about what are the implications of this and take more ownership of this, not telling people not to do it and not just putting in expensive technology. So we had fun thinking about this. I had a student, she was from Las Vegas. She was being recruited into our PhD program, and we made some jokes about what happened in Vegas didn't really stay in Vegas. Think about it for a minute, right? There's a river called the Colorado River that connects us. So, that was supposed to be funny. Sorry. Yeah, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. So when you flush the toilet, it shows up in Arizona about 2 weeks later, right? And so, all these cities upstream, take nice clean water, and they add pathogens, inorganics, trace organics, goes to these cities downstream. This is de facto reuse. So here in California, it's planned and engineered, but across most of the country, we have no idea how much of this is going on. So we developed models. We took federal databases of river systems, every wastewater treatment plant, every drinking water plant that used surface water, and developed a model called DRINKS, de facto reuse in our nation's supply, to really understand how much water of wastewater origin people were drinking. First, before we wanted to look at whether we were drinking it, we wanted to see if fish were drinking it. And so this is a map of the United States and looks at every river and how much dilution is going on in these rivers from wastewater. And we were able to take this, and we didn't have to worry about which chemical it was, but we looked at hazard quotients for fish in these. And we could look at any chemical and figure out what the exposure level was. We actually then applied this on the drinking water side and tried to understand, should we actually be conducting these what are called UCMRs, unregulated contaminant monitoring rules. And it turns out that I could just have told you that we wouldn't find any estrogen because it would be below detection limits if we had thought about these types of models. And it turns out that half of the drinking water plants in the United States are impacted by at least one upstream wastewater treatment plant. That's what this graph shows. And big circles are never good. They have more water of wastewater origin in their drinking water than these other locations. So it's a pretty high frequency, 50%, but pretty low magnitude on average, a few percent water of wastewater origin. However, in different seasons of the year or mild droughts, you can have 30 or 40% water of wastewater origin in about a quarter of the drinking water plants in the US. But Texas is interesting. So I do want to think about Texas just a little bit more. And so here's Texas, and we wanted to understand who was drinking this water of wastewater origin. Anyone from Texas? Okay, it explains a lot about Texans when you meet them next time. They drink a lot of wastewater, okay? And so, especially along the, I had to check before I said it, right? So, there's a lot of wastewater insured in the Rio Grande, but look in here, these other communities, and it turns out that the communities that drink the most wastewater are the smaller communities. Less than 10,000 people, less than 5,000 people, even less than 3,000 people that use surface water. And this is a map that shows the number of drinking water plants that use either conventional treatment, membranes, disinfection, adsorption, advanced oxidation. It's really only these two technologies that can effectively remove these pharmaceuticals and other pathogens that could be coming from these wastewater treatment plants. And so when we start looking at who has the technology, if they're impacted by wastewater here in red and green, so large communities really know how to deal with these. They might put in these advanced technologies. Some choose not to. I don't know why. They know they have pharmaceuticals there. They think it's safe because people tell them it's safe, but we don't know. Are we putting our future children at risk because they are drinking low levels of lots of things? We don't know the answer to that, right? Maybe we should be a little bit more cautious about it. But what's really interesting, as you go to these smaller plants, a far smaller percent of them have any advanced technology. So these people in these small communities have two things against them, actually three at least. One is these are small rivers. It's not the Mississippi River. It's not even the Rio Grande. These small rivers experience droughts. They can have 100% wastewater in these rivers over 30% of the year. They don't have technology. They don't even know they have the problems because they don't participate in research. They don't have the technology to remove them. And third, they don't have the financial base to actually install the technology. So we tend to focus around, it's rightly so, communities with millions of people. But these people are at the highest risk. And actually, when you go, and we were talking about this a little bit, and look at cancer clusters across the United States, it's actually in these small communities you have pretty high levels of cancer. I'm not saying it's because of the water, right? There's many other risk factors. But we don't know that, all right? And the question is, could we be more intentional about thinking about those problems? So I'm almost done here, but thinking about this bigger picture, whether it's, kind of how do we account for the upward mobility of communities? So not pharmaceuticals anymore, but very different factors occurring in society. Again, so red means the pace of change of your monthly paychecks are going up. How could that possibly affect water quality? Well, they're buying more things. They're using more things that are going down the drain, on their yard, into our watersheds. Houses are going closer together, right? So the question is, which of these many, many things, this is cancer clusters, but which of these things are going to be useful for us to think about how they affect water quality? And as we think about it, we have to get away from regulations. There's not a new drinking water regulation since a change to the arsenic rule in 2001. The federal government is not going to be out there protecting drinking water to the level that the consumers really want and interpret it. Again, they're spending their money to just hedge that. And I'd say as a consequence of things like Flint, Michigan, people are losing confidence. Maybe not here in California, right? But you have to look across the country. People are losing confidence that their drinking water maybe is safe, and they're buying these other alternatives. So could we really be kind of more thoughtful and more creative about how to look at these? Where do we need these technologies? And there's data revolutions going on your smartphone. Do you have Facebook? I picked the right guy, right? So, social media has figured a way to make money off of data. Banking, commerce, rental houses. Everyone has thought of ways to make money and improve kind of your happiness or well-being or stress you out, I'm not sure, but use data to improve things. And I'd argue that in the water industry, we haven't. You could say within a treatment plant, we have SCADA systems and we're optimizing things, but that's in your facility. How do we really look at this on a much more kind of holistic, broader geospatial scale where we understand the choices that we made are having these unintended consequences? How do we get away from hammers that play whack-a-mole. And so I'd argue that we can do this through artificial intelligence and machine learning and harvesting the trillions of data points related to water being collected almost daily in the United States. So I told you I was almost done, right? So a few closing thoughts. I think we have to go back to John Snow and really think about a health-based philosophy of safe water. We heard a lot of it here today in California, but I can tell you that's not necessarily the way every utility or every community thinks about meeting regulations and the choices that they make when it comes to spending money. I think there's a lot of unexplored, unintended consequences going on in our urban infrastructure decision-making, specifically even that on water. Right? What does it mean, the decisions to have more solar panels? We don't know what that means, right? It's not the first and even second order. I think we really need to recognize that we can't think of all these unintended consequences or wait for them to happen or wait for Dan to find one of these contaminants and make it hot in the news, like microplastics coming out of tea bags or something, right? Some crazy thing that you don't know about. You don't know if it matters. You don't know if you should remove it, but it's a contaminant du jour. So, again, I think we should broaden our perspective of society, and we really need to remember, society expects two things, quantity and quality. And quality doesn't mean just meeting a regulation. It means going beyond that, having good tasting water when you want it, where you want it. And to provide kind of a strategy to kind of avoid this whack-a-mole kind of idea of let's just create one new hammer. As I said, we have a company. We're making new hammers, right? I mean, I want to sell new hammers. It sounds like the right thing to do sometimes, but are we solving the right problems? And I think the example with nitrate shows us where that we may not be focusing on the right things sometimes. So I think, how do I think we do this? I think we do this through water information technology, foresight, artificial intelligence. I don't know what you call it. But go outside of optimization of a single treatment plant, of a single city, to really understand the probability of outcomes. There's a really good book my wife got me called Level 5. It's all about artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, but these science fiction things come to reality. In that book, they talked about artificial intelligence, running stock trading. And about a week ago, I heard that there's artificial intelligence running stock trading on Wall Street today to have one company be more prosperous than other ones. But I think we really should think about how to use artificial intelligence to predict well-being of people and the ecosystem, not just understanding how it affects the bottom line. I think there's a way to include these optimization functions. I don't know how to do it, right? But I think it's a path forward. So these are some of the next steps for me. I want to think about this. I don't know how to do it, but I really enjoy making hammers. I want to make Thor's hammer to take care of these problems. And I want to really think about, focusing on human health in these mega cities as well as poorer communities. And, our funding is from NASA, maybe one day even on the moon. So I really want to thank you for kind of bearing along with me. Thanks for sharing your cell phone. And just kind of leave it with this, that, water is art, and we advance the art of water as our community. And a few of you might know my father, Gary Westerhoff, but he took this photograph, and I think it really captures the way to end today's presentation. So thank you very much.
Well, that was certainly thoughtful, insightful, and provocative. Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it. That was a good lecture. I don't think I'm not sure I wanted it to end. That was pretty good. Hey, before we, but as the hour is getting late, it is about 9:20. I did want to take just a second to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the staff here at the Beckman Center. I really appreciate the work they did. Thank you, Katrina, and your team. Wonderful job. I want to thank the NWRI staff, Suzanne, Mary. Thank you very much. Our new intern from UCI Water, Natalie, congratulations. Thanks for being here with us this evening. And Paul, Kelly, I really appreciate you coming out. It was great to get to know you last night, spend a little time with you. And I would be remiss if I did, as I've done the last 2 years, and forgotten to thank my wife when we close the evening. So thank you, Karen. And and with that, I'd like to wish you all a safe home. And I really appreciate you having shared this time with us on the 26th Annual Clarke Prize. Have a great evening, and please be safe on your way home. Thank you.